A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippians. Dearly beloved, it is God who, in his good will toward you, begets in you any measure of desire or achievement. In everything you do, act without grumbling or arguing. Prove yourselves innocent and straightforward, children of God, beyond reproach in the midst of a twisted and depraved generation, among whom you shine like the stars in the sky, while holding fast to the word of life. As I look to the day of Christ, you give me cause to boast that I did not run the race in vain or work to no purpose, even if my life is to be poured out as a libation over the sacrificial service of your faith. I am glad of it and rejoice with all of you. May you be glad on the same score and rejoice with me. The word of the Lord. The just man shall be in everlasting remembrance. The just man shall be in everlasting remembrance. Happy the man who fears the Lord, who greatly delights in his commands. He dawns through the darkness, a light for the upright. He is gracious and merciful and just. The just man shall be in everlasting remembrance. Well for the man who is gracious and lends, who conducts his affairs with justice. He shall never be moved. The just man shall be in everlasting remembrance. The just man shall be in everlasting remembrance. An evil report he shall not fear. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. The just man shall be in everlasting remembrance. Lavishly he gives to the poor. His generosity shall endure forever. His horn shall be exalted in glory. The just man shall be in everlasting remembrance.
I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. This is how all will know that you are my disciples.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer speak of you as slaves, for a slave does not know what his master is about. Instead, I call you friends, since I have made known to you all that I heard from my Father. It was not you who chose me. It was I who chose you to go forth and bear fruit. Your fruit must endure, so that all you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. The command I give you is this, that you love one another. The Gospel of the Lord. 2 days ago, we celebrated the feast of the Stigmata of St. Francis. The next day, yesterday, we celebrated St. Joseph of Cupertino. Today, we celebrate the feast of St. Mary of Camporosso. You must be saying to yourselves, what is there, Franciscan saint every day of the year, Father David? And the answer is yes, there is. We just don't celebrate them every day, but usually every day there is. And today is no exception, St. Francis Mary of Camporosso. St. Francis Mary Camporosso was born in the year 1803. Actually, not that long ago, if you think about it. 1803. Some of you might have been around during that time, I'm not sure. However, during his life, he was born in northern Italy, and he was a child who didn't do very well at school, couldn't really pay attention in school, and didn't want to go to school anymore. And so at the age of 9 or 10, his parents let him just come home and work the farms. And it was very common in those days that if some kid didn't want to go on to become a sort of scholar, that you could make a good living as a family man just taking care of the farm. And so he did. I learned the ways of farming and so forth, and he loved the farm. And in that time on the farm, it gave him time for prayer, which is what he loved most. As he grew up, he also grew in his spiritual life, growing closer and closer to the Lord. Now, his family, at the time, the hard times hit, and they were scraping by, and he truly loved the poverty that they lived in because he recognized in their poverty an assimilation with Christ, who was born poor in a stable and lived poor in Bethlehem, in Nazareth. So he felt it a bit of an honor that he was able to live in that type of poverty like our Lord. And so when the time came, I think around 18 years old, he decided he would join the Franciscans. Well, as you know, there are 3 branches of Franciscans. Over the centuries, we've broken up into various reform movements, and so there's the conventual Franciscans, there's what they know now today as the Frati Minori Franciscans, and then there's the Capuchins, who are the most radical of the 3 branches, living the rule of Francis very radically. Padre Pio, we often talk about. He was a Capuchin Franciscan. Well, he joined the conventual Franciscans. When he joined them, he realized that they had kind of lost their observance of poverty, and he thought to himself, gee, I'm living better now than I did as a poor farmer. And so he didn't want to stay there. He was rather uncomfortable because he wasn't experiencing the poverty that he'd come to know and love as a child. And so, in a kind of sneaky way, he left there and joined the Capuchin Franciscans, who were very radical and went barefoot and so forth and slept on boards and this. And he was like, this is what I love. And he actually dove into the life and enjoyed every minute of it. As when he would lie down on the hard bed, he would think about the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. In the meager food that they had to eat, he thought about how the Holy Family had to scrape by day, and he truly loved the life very much. He would follow the regular schedule of prayer and so forth and be formed in the spiritual life and as a friar. And he wasn't that kind of guy who'd go on for the priesthood. So he wanted to just stay an average lay brother. He was going to consecrate himself to God, be a friar, but not become a priest. And that was very common among religious, that you really only became a priest as a religious if God called you within the call to that religious order. And so many of our Capuchins, Franciscan saints, were not priests. Most of them were lay brothers. And so Francis Mary was just your humble lay brother. And he didn't have any big jobs either. His big job was, when he was transferred to Genoa, was to go through Genoa and help the beggar. And they would go door to door and beg for the friars, and they would also beg for the needs of the poor, and along their way they would care for the poor and so forth. But when he would get home, he would spend his nights in prayers, praying for the people he met. He'd go back out in the streets the next day, make his rounds, meet more people, get more prayer intentions, and eventually, as he did this year after year, decade after decade, for 4 decades, being the brother quester, the brother beggar, he began to work powerful miracles in people's lives. Simple little things where he'd say a prayer for somebody and they'd find healing, or he'd give them a piece of fruit from his basket of food, and that person would eat that little piece of fruit and would be healed. Incredible miracles worked through his intercession. Well, walking those streets every day for 40 years, getting to know the entire city of Genoa, getting close to the various people, he really fell in love with his people. He fell in love with the town, and they loved him. They used to call him the Holy Brother, as he would come down the street begging food from them, and then also distributing food to the poor as he did so. Well, as time went on, and he was getting older, he was 63 years old when there was an outbreak of cholera in Genoa. And, cholera is very simple to take care of. You have to just stay hydrated, but people it was killing a lot of people. And thousands were dying from the pandemic of cholera. We all know what it's like to live through a pandemic. However, St. Francis Mary of Camporosso had no intention of putting on a mask and hiding inside the friary. If his people were suffering, he too was going to suffer with them. And so he would go out to serve them, to care for them. You realize that in 2020, that was the first time we ever put masks on and hid during a pandemic. Normally, what the church does during a pandemic is we open up the doors and we bring the sick into the church and we care for them. Normally, priests would go out to the sick and die among them. I know that there's just down south of here, is it in Georgia, along with Father Ryan, there were those several priests who also gave their lives to plague victims in the early or the late 1900s. They're working on their cause for canonization. They were martyrs for the faith, martyrs of charity, willing to die with their people to take care of the sick. And St. Francis Mary Camporosso was no different. He didn't hide and put a mask on and cower in fear. He went out, continued his rounds, giving out food to the poor and serving the sick, caring for them and making sure that they had what they needed. Well, he realized it was getting worse and worse and worse, and there was little more that he could do. So he did the one thing he could do, and that is he asked the Lord to receive him as a sacrifice for his people, that he would contract and be sick, and that he would offer his life for the end of the outbreak of the cholera. Well, he got cholera, and within 3 days, the Lord received the sacrifice that he offered of his life, and after his death, the next day, cholera was ended. He brought about the end of cholera by offering his life in sacrifice for his people as an act of charity and as an act of love. And the Lord received him as a pleasing sacrifice. We do wear white vestments for him today, but perhaps it would be more appropriate to wear red for him because he gave his life for his people, offering himself so that people would be spared of the horrible suffering that came from that pandemic of his day. What a beautiful example that he is of charity, that beautiful example of self-gift, that beautiful example of self-sacrifice. A man who took the example of our Lord Jesus Christ and really put it in practice in his life. Our Lord said, "This is my commandment, love one another." And he did. Our Lord said, "No greater love than this, than for one to lay down his life for his friends." And St. Francis Mary showed that great love in that he laid down his life for the entire city of Genoa. How beautiful. He was truly a friend of the Lord, followed the command of the Lord to love the Lord his God with his whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and truly loved his neighbor even more than himself, for he loved his neighbor as Christ had loved him unto death. We ask his powerful intercession this day that the Lord would give us that gift of charity, that the infused virtue of charity that was placed in our soul at the moment of baptism would enliven within us, would mature within us, and that we be two persons of charity, that we will truly love our neighbor as we have been loved by God, that we would be truly willing to love to the extent that Christ has loved us, that you and I, through the powerful intercession of St. Francis Mary, can follow that great command of the Lord to love one another with that beautiful gift of divine charity. May God bless you, and Mary keep you.